Hello, everybody, and a warm welcome to you all. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the launch of the 2022 Global Hunger Index. This year, in addition to, of course, getting a presentation of the findings of our report this year, we're putting a particular focus on food systems transformation and local governance. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all from wherever you are joining us from. One of the blessings about the virtual platform is that we're able to be brought together from all corners of the world via the digital platform. Thank you very much for honoring this invite. It was interesting to hear the numbers as we were opening the webinar, people joining us in big numbers from all over the world. I know that amongst those of you in the audience are people in civil society. We have members of parliaments. We have many representatives from UN affiliated organizations, representatives from ministries in governments all over the world, embassies, you name it. It is my absolute pleasure to be welcoming you all today as we get into the business of the day. I do want to get through some housekeeping. Before I do that, I'll introduce myself. My name is Christine Mundwa, and I will be facilitating our event for the rest of the duration of this program. For those of you who prefer to be listening to everything that is going to happen today in French or German, that is possible for you to do. And if you go down to the icon at the bottom of your screen, it looks like a globe. There you're able to choose the language that is to your preference. We are providing translation in French and in German, and the rest of the program will be conducted in English. I also want to point you to the fact that we are on social media, so please make use of the hashtag, which I will announce to you shortly, that you could use to get the message out there, because that is an important aspect of what we are doing today. I don't want to say too much, and I want us to get right into our program. And in that, I would like to be introducing you all to one of the first speakers of the day, and that is Mr. Matthias Moger. Please give us your initial opening remarks as we get this day underway.
Thank you, Christine. Yeah, on behalf of Concern Worldwide, Welthungerhilfe and KfW Development Bank, a warm welcome to you all. We are delighted that you have been able to join us from all around the world for the global launch of the 17th edition of the Global Hunger Index. Our audience is from as far afield as Ethiopia, Kenya, Malawi, India, South Korea, and the US, and many other countries. And I would like to also welcome friends, colleagues, and of course also long-standing partners from the German Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development and Germany's GIZ, our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, our Alliance 2015 partners across the world, and partners from the UN organization such as the WFP and FAO. This year's Global Hunger Index brings us face to face with a grim reality. We're confronting a global hunger crisis of monumental proportions. The current global food crisis is widely presented as an aftershock of the war in Ukraine. But in reality, millions of people were already living on the edge of famine. This is a legacy of past failures to build more just, sustainable, and resilient food systems. A legacy that leaves millions of people exposed to the toxic cocktail of conflict, climate change, COVID-19. But there is also hope, as this year's Global Hunger Index shows. We are looking at communities, local government, and civic actors, and on how these actors engage with each other to make decisions and allocate resources. We can see citizens are finding innovative ways to improve food systems governance at the local level and are holding decision makers accountable for addressing food and nutrition security. We are honored to have with us today Elizabeth Kimani-Murage as this year's keynote speaker. She leads the Nutrition and Food Systems Unit and the Zero Hunger Initiative at the African Population and Health Research Center in Nairobi. Every day, she advocates with her work for a paradigm shift in the way food is conceptualized, for food not to be seen just as a commodity, but as a basic human right. Welcome, Liz, in Nairobi. I'm delighted to present an excellent panel with Danielle Resnick, author of this year's GHI essay, in which she illustrates how citizens are finding innovative ways to amplify their voices in food systems debates. Please also welcome with me Tendai Saidi from our key partner in Malawi, the Civil Society Agriculture Network. And of course, our colleagues from Welthungerhilfe and Concern Worldwide, Aisha Jamshed from Pakistan and Ravda Saman from Ethiopia, joining us to delve into some of the key questions at the heart of this year's report. I'm also delighted that Maximo Torero from FAO is our guest today, who wrote a remarkable piece in this year's Global Hunger Index on the impact of the war in Ukraine on global food security, and urges that now is the time to stand in solidarity and mobilize support and action for SDG 2. Our purpose today is to alert and call for urgently needed action. Investments made today can avert future crises that may be even more costly and tragic than those we are facing now. And on the eve of World Food Day, this launch of the 2020 Global Hunger Index will also highlight solutions and bring together voices from the field to emphasize the power and value of rights-based, community-led governance to drive food systems transformation. Finally, I'm delighted that we are co-hosting today's event, like several years before, with KfW Development Bank, reflecting its important contribution in promoting agriculture development, food security, as well as good governance and decentralization processes through the support of its partner countries. I would like to hand over now to Barbara Schnell, the Director of Sector Policy at the KfW Development Bank. Barbara, it's your turn.
It's been a decade now that we as KfW Development Bank have had the great pleasure of partnering with Welthungerhilfe for the launch of the Global Hunger Index. When I talked on this occasion last year on behalf of KfW, I sadly had to mention the rising number of hungry people. Unfortunately, this year, the situation has become even worse with the Russian invasion in Ukraine. This war will further increase the number of persons suffering from hunger, as Mr. Mogo already pointed out. That means immediate action is needed to buffer the effects. And KfW is engaging in this endeavor on behalf of the German government. Besides direct support for the people living in Ukraine, KfW invests roughly an additional 120 million euros this year. We do so through the initiative One World, No Hunger, and support countries whose situation is particularly affected by the war. Emergency response, and thus a short-term perspective, is necessary to prevent hunger crises in many countries, but it's not enough. We also need the long-term perspective and find ways to transform the whole food system so that it becomes fair and more sustainable, so that it can ensure everybody's right for food. One important aspect, and also the focus of this year's World Hunger Index, is how food systems can be impacted locally, in the villages, communities, by civil society. As KfW, we have been focusing on local food systems governance. That may not be obvious, as we primarily work with national governments. But we have realized that we have to engage with the people at the local level. Let me highlight two approaches. To empower small-scale farmers, we involve them in the planning of our programs. That ensures their ownership and ultimately strengthens local food systems. We support such approaches, for instance, in Niger, Burkina Faso, and Ethiopia. Secondly, we support projects aiming at improving decision-making at community level. Moreover, we fund the implementation of important reforms for improving food security via the so-called policy-based financings. In Rwanda, for instance, we strengthen the development of the national social security system, targeting the extremely poor and vulnerable. The current situation requires more than ever before such action. Otherwise, we will face an unprecedented global hunger crisis, as the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said. We must all work together to avoid worse to happen. For KfW, I can say that we are trying as hard as we can to improve the food systems on all levels. And I'm sure that today's presentations can help us to better understand the relevance of local food systems governance and what is needed to support it. Thank you very much. I'm very much looking forward to further inputs from the other panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Barbara Schnell. The view there from the KfW Development Bank in Frankfurt. Ladies and gentlemen, I promise you that hashtag, it is hashtag GHI2022. For those of us who are active on our various social media platforms, please use that hashtag to get the message across. We will soon be coming to the point where we're getting our report summarized for us, but in the moment, here is a video that we have prepared for you now.
In the past year, the hunger situation for Malawi has shown a worsening trend caused by increasing input prices and also erratic rains brought about by climate change.
Food insufficiency is the major issue in Nepal. Many people lose their livelihood option and economic activity due to the COVID-19 in past year.
In Kenya, since 2021, we have 1 million more people who are facing hunger and starvation because we've had 4 consecutive seasons of failed rain. Also, we have high food prices and lingering COVID-19 pandemic effects.
Governance is fundamental to the functioning of food systems, and increasingly local actors and institutions are playing a greater role in food systems governance. Innovative mechanisms for increasing accountability at the local level for food systems are emerging in very different settings. Some of these mechanisms include multi-stakeholder platforms, such as urban food policy councils. Others include participatory budgeting and expenditure tracking for nutrition investments, while still others include citizen scorecards for local government performance on service delivery outcomes.
Strengthening local governance is important in food systems discourse to make sure that there are local solutions to local problems and to enhance accountability and sustainability.
We as a civil society organization focusing on the capacity building, planning and engaging community people to promote the governance and ensure food security and protect people from the hunger.
In our work in Vihiga, we are building awareness about citizen participation. We tell people that you need to participate, you need to go to the public baraza because what is discussed there will affect your life or affects your life.
Involvement of people in local governance and social accountability helps to make sure that the community voices are heard and that the grievances are redressed at the local level.
Of course, the same tools will not work everywhere, and there are certain conditions that increase the viability of accountability tools. One includes having an enabling environment that already fosters civic engagement in the policy process. And a second includes having local governments that are politically and functionally autonomous in areas of food, agriculture, and nutrition decision-making. On their own, accountability tools may not directly improve nutrition outcomes, but the practice of exercising oversight and participation empowers citizens to demand greater responsiveness from their governments and to better understand their entitlements and the means to access them.
The right to food is a human right. It is second only to the right to life. So governments have a responsibility to respect, protect, and fulfill the right to food. So there's a responsibility there to be accountable to citizens about the plans, the schemes, the programs that they have set in place, the laws also which govern the right to food and food systems. They need to be reinforced so that people can enjoy these basic human rights, which is the right to food.
My engagement in social accountability and local governance has shown that if people are really empowered through awareness of their entitlements and rights, there is improvement of service delivery by duty bearers, and also there is improvement of the demands that the communities make with regards to their entitlements.
Some of the people that you saw in the video will actually be taking part in a panel discussion that is coming up, and I would like to immediately invite you to be engaged in that. Please send your questions when the time comes via the chat, the Q&A provision in the stream, and we will do our absolute best to bring that into the conversation that we will be having with the panelists. So you sort of got a sense of what the report is about this year, but now our next speaker, who I'd like to introduce, is going to be expanding more on this year's report. Our next speaker is Cornell Foley, who is the Director of Strategy, Advocacy and Learning with Concern Worldwide.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Let me echo Matthias's opening words in welcoming you here today. As you've already heard, the Global Hunger Index is a peer-reviewed report published by Concern Worldwide and Welthungerhilfe, which since 2006 has measured and tracked long-term trends in hunger at global, regional and national levels. Over the intervening 17 years, many other reports have emerged which improve our understanding of hunger, but the added value of the GHI remains the breadth and depth of data which reflects the multidimensional nature of hunger and its ability to present a picture of how hunger is changing across the world and over the decades. As authors of this series, and together with our Alliance 2015 partners who also disseminate the report, our aim is to raise awareness about the scale of hunger, to share effective approaches to fighting hunger, and above all, to provide incentives to act. And again, the whole point of any scoring or index or league table is to provide an incentive to act. In the next few minutes, I'll explain the index itself, give you an overview of this year's findings, and dive into the data from a few different perspectives. I would encourage you all, of course, to visit the website globalhungerindex.org and explore more for yourself and over the days and weeks to come. First of all, it's important to understand how the GHI is put together, and here I point you to the circles at the top of the slide. So our index combines 4 indicators, and the reason we have these is to capture the complex and multidimensional nature of hunger. They reflect not only calorie availability, but also the quality and utilization of food and deficiencies of essential vitamins and minerals. It's also worth noting that some of these indicators are also included in measuring progress towards the Sustainable Development Goal of zero hunger. So the indicators are, firstly, the share of population that is undernourished, those with insufficient calorie intake. The second, child stunting rate, children who are low for height for their age, reflecting chronic undernutrition. The third is child wasting rate, those who were with low weight for height, reflecting acute undernutrition. And the fourth is under 5 child mortality, which really is the most tragic consequence of hunger and undernutrition. It's the percentage of children who die before the age of 5. This calculation results in scores on a 100-point scale that reflects the severity of hunger from low to extremely alarming, where 0 is the best score, that's no hunger, and 100 is the worst. An increase in a country's GHI score indicates that the hunger situation is worsening, while a decrease in the score indicates improvement in the country's hunger situation. It is important to note at this point that we only use officially published data, and that means that the data we see in the GHI is not right up to date or today's data, but that which is most recently published. So here is the big picture results of this year's index. It's a stark picture showing 44 countries in which hunger is either serious or alarming. How does this break down? Well, hunger is at alarming levels in 5 countries: Central African Republic, Chad, Democratic Republic of Congo, Madagascar and Yemen, and is provisionally considered alarming in 4 additional countries: Burundi, Somalia, South Sudan, and Syria, where we maybe have less good data. In a further 35 countries, hunger is considered serious based on 2022 GHI scores and provisional designations. Last year, we were already talking about the toxic cocktail of conflict, climate change, and the COVID-19 pandemic, and about the global food crisis engulfing the poorest and most vulnerable. This year, with the impacts of the Ukraine crisis hitting home, the picture is becoming a whole lot worse. Frankly, the knock-on effects of the war on global supplies and the rising prices of food, fertilizer, and fuel is turning crisis into a catastrophe. Of the countries provisionally designated as alarming, and those are Burundi, Somalia, South Sudan, and Syria, it is possible that with complete data, one or more of them could fall into the extremely alarming category. However, without sufficient information to confirm that this is the case, we've conservatively categorized each of these countries as alarming. But again, people can look at the IPC data for those countries to see what more we need to do. So looking regionally, the GHI shows us that hunger is serious in both South Asia and Africa south of the Sahara. If you dig into the data under this summary, you will see that South Asia has the world's highest child stunting and child wasting rates, while in Africa south of the Sahara, the prevalence of undernourishment and the rate of child mortality are higher than in any other world region. Many of you will already be aware too that East Africa is experiencing one of the most severe droughts of the past 40 years, with I think 4 failed rains, potentially a 5th, threatening the survival of millions. Looking to West Africa, Asia and North Africa, we can see that hunger is moderate, but there are still worrying signs within this data of a reversal in progress against hunger. And finally, we see that in Latin America and the Caribbean, East and Southeast Asia, and Europe and Central Asia, hunger is considered low. But again, we have to look beyond regional averages to get a better understanding of what's happening in each of the country's situations. Here we're looking at changes since 2000, and we can see lots of countries who have been moving in the right direction, whose hunger levels have decreased over time. So the broader message there is progress is possible. A lot of countries have actually implemented the right kinds of policies and interventions, and a lot of progress has been made over the last 2 decades. However, and the last few years really have seen a worrying trend. So a reversal in decades of progress in fighting hunger. And once again, we can dive into the data to better understand the nature of hunger in different countries and contexts. Here we can look at different indicators and see, for example, child stunting is highest in Yemen, child mortality is highest in Somalia, child undernourishment highest in Central African Republic, and child wasting highest in India. Behind these figures, of course, what's harder to take in is the human impact behind the figures. The fact that since the data was gathered, things have worsened considerably, and the numbers of people in crisis and behind these statistics, it is staggering. We had a briefing concern just a few weeks ago and heard that in the Horn of Africa alone, the overall number of people affected by the drought is 36.1 million. And of course, the humanitarian needs are immense and they must be responded to. But we also have to acknowledge that the speed and severity of this tsunami of hunger has happened because millions are already living on the precarious edge of hunger, a legacy of past failures to build more just, resilient and inclusive food systems. And while we know these are difficult things to build, it's in these most fragile contexts where we need to build them most. That brings us back to the theme of this report about food systems and local governance and the discussion we will have with our esteemed colleagues and panelists. So thank you all for joining, and I will now hand you back to Christine.
Thank you, Cornel Foley there. Now, I want to pivot to our keynote. This is Elizabeth Kimani Murage. She leads the Nutrition and Food Systems Unit at the Zero Hunger Initiative, that is at the African Population and Health Research Center, what you might know as APHRC. Now, Elizabeth, as part of her research, she leads the work aimed at transforming food systems in Kenya, as well as in the rest of Africa, to make them more nourishing, more human-centered, as well as resilient and sustainable. Elizabeth, the internet was threatening us a short while ago, but I can perfectly see you now. And if you can hear me, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Christine. Yes, I have challenges. I'll use my phone because I had problems with my computer. So good evening, everyone. Today, on this occasion of the Global Hunger Index launch, I'm so honored to deliver this keynote speech. The world is in the midst of a food crisis, a crisis which is a reflection of our malfunctioning food systems. Fixing these failures is therefore an urgent endeavor for us. I will focus on three things. One, I'll focus on the failures of our food systems, what is being done to fix these failures, and what more could be done to nourish people with healthy food sustainably. I will focus on Kenya, my home country, where the global food problem is being experienced in a very real way at the local level. Our food systems have led to starvation, malnutrition, diseases, and environmental degradation. This has speeded up the climate change and a cascade of calamities. The current global challenges have laid bare the weaknesses of our food systems, showing how non-inclusive and non-resilient these food systems are. It's hard for many of us to imagine how being hungry feels like. But in Kenya, at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a story that interested millions of people. And this was a story of a woman who was cooking stones for her children. And why? Because she had nothing else to cook for the children. She made them believe that she was preparing food for them. This story was not, and is not, an isolated one. The pandemic paralyzed the economy with huge impacts on the day-to-day lives of the urban poor, for example. The lockdown measures disrupted food supply from rural areas, leaving many urban dwellers who rely on food from far away in rural areas hungry. On top of the pandemic came the impacts of the climate change. Kenya, like many other countries in the Horn of Africa, is experiencing the most severe drought in about past 40 years, persisting for over 3 years. Millions of people in the arid and semi-arid areas are facing severe starvation. Countless heads of cattle in these areas have died, leaving many families with no food and with no livelihoods. Accessing affordable, healthy diets, especially fruits and vegetables, is a huge challenge in many of these areas. But against this stark background, it is important to recognize the efforts that are being made to improve food systems at the national and local levels. There is an increasing recognition of the importance of a human rights-based approach to food systems transformation in Kenya. Kenya has recognized the right to food in her constitution and has in place a food and nutrition security policy that seeks to actualize the right to food. It is now important that ordinary Kenyans are becoming aware of the right to food, and they also are aware that they can make a difference. However, more needs to be done to enable these citizens to participate fully in developing and monitoring public policies and to hold the government accountable. In terms of national policy and strategy, Kenya's Vision 2030 lays emphasis on food security with a key interest on marginalized areas, including the arid and semi-arid areas. It also focuses on supporting food production at the small scale holder level through reduction in farm inputs. However, given the scale of the challenge that we now face as a country, more investment is needed by the government and our development partners to address these food systems challenges. And this should start with investment in agriculture. Kenya's budget allocation to agriculture stands at about 3%, which is just a small proportion against a commitment of 10%. Boosting these investments would also speed up implementation of Kenya's commitment at the 2021 UN Food Systems Summit. Moving from the national to the local level, we have a myriad of lessons that we have learned from the various crises that the world has experienced in the last several years. For example, we have learned of the importance of supporting local food production for local use. Communities should not have to wait for food from so far away in Ukraine, which may never reach them again. Supporting kitchen gardens at the community level and also at the household levels, wherever people live, could make a difference between a mother cooking stones for her children and a mother cooking nutritious, healthy food for her family. Through this crisis, we have learned of the importance of grassroots organizations in sustaining the resilience of the food systems in their communities. At the height of COVID-19 pandemic, for example, there was a heightened involvement of community organized groups, including youth groups and women groups in urban poor areas, in producing food to feed themselves in their localities, to feed themselves and their communities. Last week, sorry, I got interrupted because I'm using my phone. Last week, as I visited a few of these groups that we, the African Population and Health Research Center, are supporting, we met several of these groups, and many of those groups that we talked to, they were talking about how they are able to feed their families and their communities with healthy food, vegetables, eggs, and poultry. As we commemorate the World Food Day this year, we are hosting a food festival with these groups to celebrate the right to food. We will also launch a Zero Hunger movement, inviting many such groups to the fight against hunger through local areas and raise awareness on the right to food. I believe that these are the changes that matter the most, changes at the local level, and these are the changes which we all need to support. Only if communities and actors have a say with their local knowledge and their local needs, sustainable solutions for ending hunger can be found. And as I come to a close, I want to reiterate the words of the Nobel Peace Prize laureate, Wangari Maathai. The little grassroots people can change the world. I call for local governance and community action support for better accountability, sustainability, and resilience of our food systems. Let's leave no one behind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Thank you so much. Your message was heard loud and clear, and we really appreciate that keynote that you have presented to us all the way from Nairobi. Thank you so much, and you've really laid the groundwork for now to get into our panel discussion for the day. And I would like to take a short moment now and introduce to you the people, and dare I say, the women that you will now be hearing from as we get into our panel. We have Danielle Resnick. You might remember her from the video that we played earlier on. She is from the Brookings Institution and International Food Policy and Research Institute. She's also where she is a non-resident fellow. She's a political scientist by training, and her research areas include the political economy of agriculture and nutrition, policy, the governance of informal sector traders, urban politics, and decentralization. Tendai Saidi is coming to us as Program Director for Civil Society Agriculture Network, CISANET in Malawi, where she is Head of Programs and Policy. She has overall oversight of all the programs at the organization. The CISANET membership, ladies and gentlemen, has been a key member in advocating for sustainable food systems in Malawi, and we will be getting a report from her about the situation as it is on the ground in Malawi. Aisha Jamshed is the country director for Pakistan for Welthungerhilfe. She has over 18 years of experience in the aid sector. She has worked for affected communities across Pakistan, as well as supported those in Nepal and Turkey for both natural as well as man-made disasters. And then we have, last but not least, Rauda Saman. She is Program Director for Ethiopia for Concern Worldwide. She's worked in Environmental Protection Authority as a research officer in the Horn of Africa, the Regional Environment Center, as well as project coordinator at GIZ Biodiversity and Forestry Program, as a knowledge management advisor, as well as in the Ethiopian Red Cross Society, among other things. So just a brief snapshot of the very lengthy CVs that our speakers have today. But I do perhaps want to begin here with the sense of just getting into the aspect of hunger and food systems in the face of multiple crises. And Danielle, if I can perhaps start with you, because we're in an environment where policymakers have very difficult decisions to make, choosing between humanitarian efforts and otherwise. Perhaps launch us in here, Danielle, and give us a sense of what would you say is what policymakers should do in addressing transformation as well as humanitarian needs.
Okay, well, many thanks, Christine. And I think you rightly allude to the fact that we have a lot of different concurrent dynamics going on at the moment. Of course, on the one hand, and as Elizabeth underscored, there's a sense of urgency to prioritize food access for the hungry, elevating the importance of humanitarian assistance. But on the other hand, we're continuing to see the importance of food systems transformation on the policy agenda. Just several weeks ago at both the G20 summit and also at the African Green Revolution Forum, policy leaders conveyed their continued commitment to resilient food systems transformation. And in just a few weeks from now at COP27, the importance of food and agriculture to climate will be on the COP agenda for the first time. So I think we'll always be balancing this need to respond to short-term crises with investment in longer-term development strategies. And this is often why governments and donors do have separate ministries, agencies, and bureaus to deal with these different circumstances. In my mind, there's several issues or challenges to consider. I think there's first a need to consider better integration of decision-making and iterative learning across these two arenas, eventually, especially since they are often institutionally separated. So in other words, crisis responses should not derail a country from the policy choices that comprise its food systems transformation pathway. And at the same time, crises should be seen as opportunities to actually stress test food systems and reveal key vulnerabilities to help further refine longer-term interventions. Secondly, the challenge we have is that both the current food crisis and the last one that we had in 2008 have intersected with financial and economic crises that ultimately forced governments and donors to cut back their resource allocations, making these decisions much starker. So if there's measures by which we are conserving resources for humanitarian needs during periods of economic growth, a rainy day fund, if you will, then these trade-offs between supporting humanitarian needs versus long-term transformation may be less severe when an actual crisis does occur. I think thirdly, given scarce resources, there does need to often be greater coherence first within humanitarian agencies in their appeals so that donors' resources can be more effectively consolidated. For instance, right now, there are at least 6 different UN funding appeals for the Horn of Africa. And by the same token, there also needs to be greater precision within the development and food communities about what we mean by investing in food systems transformation. What exactly should governments prioritize? How should they sequence their decisions so they don't create unintended consequences? When we look at Sri Lanka, for example, where economic and political collapse were exacerbated by a ban on inorganic fertilizer that then affected agricultural production and export revenue, we start to see how complex these interventions can become if they're not appropriately sequenced and if they fail to consider the broader macro political economy.
Thanks for that, Danielle. Tendai, I want to come to you now because you are in Malawi, and we know in this year's report, Malawi's score in the Global Hunger Index is considered serious with very only slight improvement. since 2024. But perhaps if you could just take a moment now to tell us about the challenges in the Malawian food system and how then this affects poorer households in particular.
Thank you, Christine. So the main drivers to the challenges we are facing now within Malawi have been, one, the recurrent shocks and dry spells. So early this year, we had the tropical storm Anna, which actually resulted in displacement of people within the southern region. And we have an approximate 1 in 5 people who are projected to experience acute food insecurity in the upcoming rain period. The second challenge is obviously the international economic crisis. So COVID-19, the Ukraine-Russian invasion, all have worsened the disruption in the food system's supply chain. And this has resulted in major hikes in fuel prices, hikes in fertilizer prices, and this has resulted in increased cost of living. In some parts of Malawi, you'll find that maize, which is our staple grain, has actually tripled in prices. And we foresee that in the future, we might find people maybe reducing the number of meals that they take per day, rationing their food, seeking distant labor, maybe selling their assets such as household and land. So the third one is obviously the poor policies and the governance systems. And this is because there is poor governance and also there is poor coordination in how projects or activities are being implemented at grassroots. But as you've mentioned, there have been some slight changes and improvements, and these have been attributed to the efforts in integrating nutrition and social behavior change communication in both nutrition-specific and nutrition-sensitive programming through government and development partner initiatives. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much for that, Tendai. That is, of course, the view from Malawi there. Aisha, I want to come over to you now. You're in Pakistan, and I think many of us remember that not too far back, we were witnessing unprecedented flooding in Pakistan. And I wondered if you could just take a moment now to tell us what that means for Pakistan and its ambitions and prospects to achieve SDG, specifically SDG 2, by 2030.
Thank you, Christine. Just very quickly, I think it's important to know that prior to the floods of 2022 and as well as the COVID-19 pandemic, every third person in Pakistan was food insecure. Of the 230 million population, nearly half is stunted. Rates of malnourished children is at an all-time high. Every fifth child is malnourished in the country. As the country faces a hunger crisis, unprecedented weather events linked to climate change like heat wave, drought, floods, coupled with local infestations, pandemic, continuously disrupt the food system. The 2022 floods have affected 30 million people in Pakistan, and I'd like to move forward with an example from Fazal Kareem, a small farmer in district Umarkot of Sindh, who was already struggling to provide sufficient food to his family due to recurrent drought and heat waves in the past 2 years. He had to flee with 5 children and his wife from his home when water came. And now nearly after 3 months, he's still waiting for the water to recede. He's still stranded on the roadside, no food, no shelter, no way of livelihood, lost his crop in the flooding and still waiting to go back to his farm. He lost his harvest for this year and he's possibly not going to have a harvest for the next season also. He is a victim of global phenomena of climate change. This is a similar story you will see of farming families across the Indus Basin in Pakistan. And this is an area that provides half the food for the whole country. For the people in Pakistan, the challenge is not just about building back better. It is not just about absorption or adaptation anymore. Communities need to adapt on one hand, and at the same time, they need to transform so that they're facing new realities. It means looking at different ways to anticipate, get prepared, look for alternate ways of living. Urbanization is on the rise. We need better planning for better urban planning. Resources in rural areas are shrinking. It means we need indigenous sustainable solutions. And in terms of transmission of Pakistani food systems, it should not just be about food production, but also to address other components of the food system. But to answer your question, I think Pakistan is very, very far off in terms of reaching the goal for SDG 2.
Yeah, and thank you for that context. Before the pandemic, as well as the recent flooding, the status quo in the country, so to say. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been in touch with the colleagues behind the scenes, and we know that a number of questions are coming in via the chat forum. We are noting them, and we appreciate that. I do want to just ask you, though, it would make my job much easier, and for everybody else, if you could specify to which panelist you would like to direct that question to, so that we can get it over to the right panelist. Rauda, I want to come to you now because you're in Ethiopia, and I'll point out here that, in fact, Concerns had a presence in Ethiopia for about 5 decades now. But against the backdrop of the current global food crisis that we're experiencing, could you give us a sense of the key challenges as you see them on a day-to-day basis in Ethiopia? So Rauda, are you getting us? We can see you. Did you get the question?
Yeah. Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you, Kristen. As Concern, we aim to help people those are in the greatest need. As a dual-mandated organization, we are working in humanitarian response as well as long-term development. But we are seeing the pressure on the community that's created by climate change and conflict. So both are making them harder and harder to the community to bounce back. The challenges are many, but I would like to highlight 3 points. The first one is the challenge of keeping focus on food system, because the reality in the ground is sometimes we are forced to interrupt the long-term intervention in order to respond the growing of humanitarian needs. So if we break the cycle of crisis, we are able to keep focus on long-term approach so that we can ensure the commitment of last year UN Food System Summit and followed up the national level. The second one is the challenge of funding and funding modality. It is obvious that we need additional funding to respond the growing of humanitarian needs. Again, we need a more flexible funding modality so that we can pivot to make different kind of programming. You know, more flexible funding help us to respond long-term and short-term needs at the same time. So we have got better working in the nexus. The third one is not only food security. We have to talk about food and nutrition security. From Global Hunger Index highlight, we can see that the considerable variation of child stunting across the region. So we know that how the first 1,000 days of child life in terms of nutrition, pure nutrition can have irreversible negative impact on child physical and mental development. So we can address only stunting through prioritization of pupil nutrition. But this is a long-term endeavor. Sometimes we have to see it as urgent one too, in order to change the way how we are think and act.
Thank you, Rauda. So in this part of our conversation, I was really asking our panelists and our speakers to sort of lay the groundwork for us in terms of establishing what the problem statement is. I want to now pivot us into a more sort of solutions part of our discussion here and get a sense of what we could do in terms of the policy. asks here, I mean, why does local governments or food systems even matter? Because that is our emphasis for today. And which improvements of food systems can be achieved in the face of what we are saying is a multi-layered global hunger crisis? And I want to begin with you, Danielle, because we're talking about local governance. That is the term that we're using here. But just unpack that for us, if you will, about the role that it plays in regards to transforming food systems.
Yeah, thank you, Christine. It's a great question because local governance certainly has many connotations. In this year's GHI essay, the term local really is referring to both subnational actors, such as mayors, traditional authorities, community-based associations, as well as subnational administrative units. You can think about cities, districts, regions, states. And then when we're talking about local governance, that's specifically referring to how those subnational actors and institutions engage with citizens to make decisions, allocate resources, and deliver goods and services that are critical for enhancing access to and improving the availability of healthy foods. We think there's several reasons why a local perspective is very useful when talking about food systems. First and foremost, many countries have decentralized over the last 20 years, and increasingly many are devolving. This means they're transferring responsibilities for agriculture, livestock, health, and environment to local authorities. So often the locus of decision-making and implementation is actually shifting. And secondly, and relatedly, we're seeing that as we look at the importance that mayors and other local leaders are getting vis-a-vis a lot of international initiatives and transnational networks. We're seeing a lot of mayors at the forefront of initiatives such as the C40s initiative, the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact, and there's sometimes more scope for innovation and progress at the local level than at the national level. Third, local authorities, both formal and informal, can by definition they're in much closer proximity to residents and therefore can gain a more fine-grained understanding of local consumption and production needs. And at the same time, this proximity enables citizens to exert more oversight over local government decisions and hopefully have a greater voice in the policy process. Lastly, in more fragile settings, the state often does not exert full authority or legitimacy over the territory it legally governs. And local non-state actors or traditional authorities may be better placed or have greater trust with populations to meet their food needs. So, I don't want to romanticize the local level. There's certainly a lot of power asymmetries and social exclusion that can occur at the local level. But I do think that there's a lot of scope for inclusivity and accountability in food system policy processes, often at the local level than we get at the national level. And in the current geopolitical context, something I think that we'll struggle to get at the global level in the coming years.
You talked about a shifting of power, and as you were speaking, I could see Tendai nodding over there. So Tendai, that was actually my cue to come over to you, because from a civil society stakeholder perspective, I know that you're involved in amplifying the voices of people that are almost marginalized, if we can. Can you talk to us about the effective approaches that you are applying to improve food systems governance at that local level?
So SYSANET, we work at improving transparency and accountability in agriculture investments and agriculture programs implementation through evidence-based advocacy. And one such way we do this actually is through the national budget analysis. I liked Elizabeth's speech because she mentioned how Kenya actually allocates 3% of its public expenditure to agriculture versus a 10% commitment. In Malawi, we do meet our 10% commitment. However, a closer look at our budget shows that 80% of the operations budget is actually allocated to the Affordable Inputs Program. So this financially starves other programs, for instance, livestock, extension services, irrigation, and research, which are equally important. Extension workers are also key in ensuring sustainable agriculture practices and educating the masses on good nutrition practices for improved food and nutrition. So you find that even financing for nutrition across sectors still remains a wide challenge. So through the Strengthening Rural Governance to the Right to Food project, a project that we are implementing together with the Community Initiative for Self-Reliance and World Hunger Health Fair, we also use community scorecards. They were mentioned earlier. We do social audits, policy and community dialogues to identify challenges in the food systems, especially at grassroots. We also participated in the UNFSS, and that way we also help in creating awareness on the right to food. So in our advocacy efforts now, we are mobilizing a strong CSO coalition and stakeholders and are engaging duty bearers being parliamentarians, policymakers, sector leaders, through this coalition. So we disseminate our findings, those that we collect through the budget analysis, the community scorecards, the social audits, and then we advocate for improvements in financing and implementation of programs. We also create platforms such as public hearings, where we ensure that issues identified at grassroots are actually trickled all the way to national level. So we also partner with media so that our coverage is also amplified and our efforts better felt. Thank you.
Thank you, Tendai. And I want to come over to you, Aisha, in Pakistan, because you're sort of building up community resilience, as I understand it, in close collaboration with local government structures specifically. Can you maybe share what have you learned from these approaches in the light of our ever more sort of complex crises that we're talking about? What's that experience been?
Sure, thank you. Yes, a lot of World Hunger Health Fair's work in Pakistan has focused on community-oriented approaches, specifically developing community structures. And I mean, you need to know it takes concentrated time and longer-term engagement with the communities to get to a certain level. I would again like to explain through another example from District Rajanpur from Punjab. World Hunger Health Fair and its partners established dedicated village disaster management committees, Union Council disaster management committees, and emergency response teams at the village and Union Council level as part of the resilience building structures post the 2010 floods. Rajanpur, again, in one of the worst affected districts in Punjab during the recent flooding in Pakistan. The villages where these committees were formed were ahead in response. They were able to save lives, get timely evacuation for those who needed, and then support immediate relief activities supported by the government and other local actors. This was possible because the structures were already in place. They were well connected and equipped through stockpiling and training. They were well linked with the local rescue services, which is the Rescue 1122. And they went on even to go help the local authority in evacuation from neighboring areas. To improve governance, community-oriented approaches have been proven successful. The community structures participate, they take responsibility, and they respond. Another good example would be the allocation and use of resources through community participation in Swat and Shangla district of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Village development plans were collectively developed with the local government authorities, elected representatives led by the communities. These plans were then notified by the district government. Some plans were funded up to 40% of the local government by the local government structures. This was made possible by applying a combination of actions such as the community scorecard, social audits. However, we must bear in mind these structures require investment in terms of capacity building and platform development. There are several successes to quote when it comes to participatory model of governance, a model which should be adapted when it comes to allocation of resources, upward accountability, social audits, community scorecards, local adaptation plans of action, as well, and well thought out advocacy stakeholder engagement plans, as well as engagement platforms at the tehsil and district level are great examples to replicate and scale up.
Rauda, you also have some success stories in Ethiopia. Then I wanted for you to just take a quick moment and share with us some of those approaches that you have been promoting that you would say really transform food systems.
Yes, we were involved in the preparation of last year's summit. And there was a great effort to gather ideas that can be improve Ethiopian food system. In the process, Concern and Alliance 2050 partners were forwarding different approach to be taken by the government, and the government have taken follow-up things. The first approach was focusing on access to farmers' quality seed. This is just an approach of linking cooperative with research center and seed producing enterprise. The other approach was just promoting fortified vegetables, linking in the local market, linking with awareness among household in maternal and child nutrition. The third approach that was picked up was index-based livestock insurance, which is a satellite-based monitoring to climate change-related risks, like drought. And the collected data is used to calculate insurance claim. The fourth approach was restoring the land and severely degraded land, putting together with an effective physical and biological soil and water conservation, watershed development, so that the soil will be enriched and the fertility of the land will be returned. The most important thing of this approach is inclusiveness of the stakeholders, especially the local community is the center of putting together in development plan. So in this approach, we have a huge success over the last year. We have reclaimed about 2,000 hectares of land, and even in one area of our intervention, the soil erosion is reduced by 70%. This is not just a dramatic change of physical land restoration. It is the restoration of the livelihood of the community who is living in that area. So this approach is taken by the government, and we are continuing to advocate to be scaled up at national level.
Right. I actually want to just take a moment now, ladies, and get into the questions that are coming through to the audience. What I will ask is that you perhaps keep your answers sharp and precise, because that means I can actually cover a lot of ground. Tendai, the first one, in fact, no, Aisha, in fact, I'll bring this one to you first, because somebody is pointing out in the audience that, you know, to what extent, Aisha, does patriarchy play in sort of intra-household food security, and how can that be addressed, if you've understood? So the question there being, patriarchy and the role that it plays in intra-house food insecurity, and how that can be addressed.
I think it plays a very important role in the context of Pakistan. One of the driving factors, in fact, if we look at it that way, and there were various ways to address it. And I think one of the best is to talk about nutrition and the effect it has on generations, and what the effect nutrition, FNS, has on the economic situation of a household. And I find that as one of the most appropriate tools of addressing the patriarchal effect on this. Thank you.
Thank you. And now for you, Tendai, the question is, specifically in, well, not necessarily for Malawi, but what mechanisms are in place to foster production of traditional food varieties in a country to ensure that communities access nutritious alternatives that are low cost and easily accessible? So perhaps maybe actually from your vantage point in Malawi, what are the mechanisms that are in place to foster the production of traditional food varieties in country, to ensure that communities can access nutritious alternatives that are low cost and easy to access?
Thank you, Christine. So in Malawi, what we are also promoting, and through the help, obviously, of different partners, is that there is the recycling of seed amongst farmers. As much as we are promoting improved variety seeds, but we also promote our own traditional seeds as well. So there are seed banks that people can also make use of. And also through the SBCC, that's social behavior change communication as well, we have tried to improve people's perception of what is nutritious, because that has been shifting as people adopt more modern ways of culture and more foods, but we are still trying to keep people grounded. So there's a lot of social behavior change communications that is aligned to nutrition specific and nutrition sensitive programming. So people that still remain glued to their traditional meals, which have more fiber, nutrition dance, and those are some of the programs that we are promoting at Grassroots.
Okay, so that question there coming to you from a colleague in Niger, and I think you've done a fair job in giving an answer to that. Danielle, one for you here, because somebody is asking, who is supposed to coordinate the international initiatives for global food security? They're pointing out here that there are so many initiatives now in play, many people playing that role. But how should all of this be coordinated, right? The international initiatives for global food security.
Okay, well, that's a great question. And no doubt that I think that there are a plethora of initiatives out there. But I think many do look at the UN, and particularly at the UN Food Systems Summit last year, as a real kind of mechanism for coordination. A lot of the UN agencies around that, the FAO, World Food Program, and others have been, quite central in trying to coordinate different activities there, including following up with countries that had these national dialogues and are trying to draft their national food system dialogues. So I think there's further scope for kind of other actors to be getting involved, but there is always this tension between, too many actors, and then the challenge of then how do you actually implement on the ground and have some coherence recommendations to governments on such a vast topic as food systems transformation.
Yeah, and thank you to whoever relayed that question. A very good point to bring into our conversation. Rauda, one to you, because somebody is noting that you talked earlier about the need for more flexible funding modalities. You also talked about the importance of keeping a focus on nutrition specifically. You are now being asked to present if there are any examples that you could share, rather to explain to us what this might look like in practical terms, right? The funding modalities as well as this focus on nutrition. You are muted still.
Thank you, Christine. We have experience of implementing multi-year program, which is funded by ECHO. The program is just emergency response for nutrition, but at the same time has a health system strengthening on the same program. So this is help us to strengthening the health system that is focused for nutrition. And in the meantime, it has early warning, early action funding facilities. We are able to use this funding for different crises like droughts, displacement, and rocketing spike. And in the meantime, we are strengthening the health system in order to maintain the nutrition outcome. So this is the key important thing is we can continue both short and long-term responses within a single program. The health system will help us to work sustainably the nutrition and the health system. The other one help us to easily respond the humanitarian needs that is arise on the time. So I would be happy to share more details after this event if people were interested in this program.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm sure there will definitely be interest on that. Rauda, I want to come to you because, Aisha, thank you, Rauda, is what I meant to say. There is a question, in fact, that's directed for Welthungerhilfe. If you could speak there. Do you have any national level policy recommendations to the government in Pakistan? And the context of this question is that the country is getting more vulnerable by the different disasters. So are there any policy recommendations at a national level for the government in Pakistan to mitigate food insecurity challenges in the country?
I think the first for us would be that they need to look at it through the integrated lens. The way that currently it is being looked at is too linear, and the policy needs to be more diverse in its approach. the way that it is being drafted, the way the outlook is there. I think what we continuously miss on is how the frequent crisis shocks or the climate impact on the overall food policy that Pakistan has, those have not been taken into account. The measures that are being taken are not indigenous, and they need to be taken into account too for sustainability in the longer run. And the disconnect between the local government structures and the ones that is there at the national level, and how power and resources are actually transferred down the chain to ensure that policies can be rolled out is something that really needs to be strengthened.
Thank you for that. Tendai, one for you here. In Malawi, to what extent did the social cash transfers reduce food insecurity and hunger? And perhaps just give us some background to those that cash transfer program that you have in Malawi.
So I do know that we have a social cash transfer program, which is mainly being led by the World Food Program. And this is targeting the majority of people who are in disaster-prone areas. So this could be like people experiencing dry spells, or it could be water where we have got flooding. They have been very important, especially in building the resilience of communities, where with social cash transfers, people are flexible in actually prioritizing their needs instead of being given, say, a food basket, etc. But with a cash transfer, you find that it's a very good way, especially when it's combined with the social behavior change communication I was talking about, where people are now educated on what is healthy, what is not healthy, how to use that cash. They become more efficient in responding to the needs of the communities, and a very good way to respond to disaster in disaster-prone areas.
Absolutely. And of course, we know that the benefits of those, in addition to empowering people to make their own decisions, it has a ripple effect, right? It goes beyond the immediate recipient of the cash transfer. Danielle, here's a big one for you, and I think this is one we need to consider very well, because we are saying here that the global crisis narrative, or at least this is how the question is coming, we mainly hear that it's the 3 C's, right? We've mentioned one of them is conflict, climate change, and the other escapes me, and I'm sure you have it on hand. And then we talk about the war in Ukraine, and we say that these are the dominant drivers of the current global food crisis. The question is this just too much of a simplistic picture? That are we potentially missing out on more sort of structural drivers that have led to our global foods, to the food systems breaking? And do we perhaps need to reframe the debate? So I hope you got me there, that the emphasis is on the 3 C's and now the war in Ukraine, and are we potentially missing out on having a conversation about potential structures that might need to actually be reformed?
Yeah, no, fabulous question. I think that operates at multiple levels, and we're talking about those multiple levels today. I mean, I think, at the national level, there's a lot on kind of marketing and trade and pricing policies that governments have had in place that, I think have exacerbated these current crises. Marketing boards that we're not maybe always giving farmers fair prices. Price ceilings for goods urban consumers, consume that, have to be lifted under crisis and create a sense of greater vulnerability than if those price ceilings were not in place. I think, Tendai pointed to some of the biases in how agricultural expenditures have been used. Of course, a lot of countries favor these high visibility investments and subsidies. But we know from decades of research that it's really investments in agricultural research and development that give you higher productivity, but that's not always politically convenient. Those developments take a long time to manifest, and they're not obvious to voters. But that's been a clear, blind side, and I think in terms of a lot of investment strategies. And then I would say third, at the global level, a lot of people have talked about the consolidation of global supply chains. And the role of corporate actors in the agri-food sector. There's some benefits, obviously, to consolidation, but clear vulnerabilities that we saw become very pronounced with the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, which I guess was the other C, COVID.
Thank you for that, Danielle. I was just having a look here. One for Aisha, perhaps. The question pointing out initially that the role of local government is definitely important. But how about the role of national government in supporting local government in the process of food transformation? So how does national government support local government in that process?
I think yeah, good one. There are a couple of ways. I think the first is, of course, the appropriate policies and the translation of those policies down at the grassroots level. And then again, the capacity building for the local government representatives and the local government authorities. I think the clarity in terms of roles and responsibilities, there is a lot of blurriness, especially if I speak in the context of Pakistan, on the allocation of roles, the ownership of those roles, and then again, the resource allocation based on those roles. So that is something that really needs to be looked into.
Aisha, I want to stay with you, please, because another one is coming in for you, and then I'll move on to Tendai. Brace yourself for another one coming. That obviously we pointed out that Pakistan was impacted by the recent floods, and that's had obviously a huge impact on food insecurity. Has the discussion been initiated at government level on the loss and damage, which COP27 is also now supposed to prioritize in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt?
I think there is discussions at various levels that is taking place. I mean, the coordinated effort towards that is something that we still need to work on a bit more. Okay. And I think the shortage of resources with the government at the moment in terms of getting all of that together is something that we are struggling with as a country, but definitely something that needs to be taken on more seriously and with all stakeholders. I think right now what we're really struggling with is who does what in this larger scenario, which role would fit with which particular section within the government, also at the national and then at the provincial level. But the discussions have definitely started.
Tendai, how far have you gone in Malawi to integrate resilience building and also the sort of anticipatory forecast-based programming when you consider protecting food systems from the different hazards, if you will, the droughts, the dry spells, the storms and the cyclones?
So there is a lot that's actually being done in terms of resilience building, anticipatory planning, and we have a lot of stakeholders within the disaster preparedness platform who are taking a very leading role in this. We also have insurances that are being given to people. So the government also has an insurance package that it can be given should a disaster come unplanned. It's always unplanned. So there's a lot of investments in those areas and also trying to see how the community's resilience also can be built through skills building and also through infrastructure. We are also looking at also how they can also foretell when shock is about to come and how they can also ensure that they are growing more drought-resistant crops, for instance, in the dry parts of the country. So a lot is actually being done and a lot of interventions are on the ground right now, and also the anticipatory planning as well.
Right, thank you so much. I wish I could continue with our questions and answers. I'm seeing that many more are coming in, ladies and gentlemen, but I have to consider our time and the fact that we are running down the clock. We have 9 minutes remaining of our program time. So what I will ask my esteemed panelists to do before we conclude our conversation is I'm interested to know in just what is your main takeaway. You've heard some of the questions that are coming in from the audience. You've made your contributions, taking in light what we now know the report is telling us in its findings this year. Just a sentence or two, something that we can take away from your contributions today. And we'll start this way. I'll begin with you, Danielle. Rauda will come to you, Tendai, you, and then Aisha.
Okay, well, thanks, Christine. I think I want to go back to the points I made earlier, which is that we may not always know the right investments for food systems transformation, but I think coming out of this panel, we have a good sense of the processes that we should be thinking about for food systems transformation. And particularly, those best principles of inclusivity and accountability, and trying to build on extant community efforts. I mean, there's a lot of things going on the ground that we've heard of over the last hour and a half. And ensuring we have a diversity of voices in the policy process. I think, also being quite serious about learning from both successes and failures at this local level, and thinking about not necessarily how these could be scalable to a national level, but at least transferable across, other subnational entities within the same country or in other countries. So kind of the process of inclusive and accountability for food systems transformation.
Thank you, Danielle. Rauda?
Thank you, Christine. I would like to emphasize on a flexible funding for food and nutrition security, as well as advocacy at local government level and empowering the local community in order to create accountability for the local government. Thank you.
Thank you. Tendai?
For me, my final words would be, our most vulnerable continue to be the most affected by food insecurity and malnutrition. Hence, there is a need for power to shift to the people. So there is need to know that food is not a privilege, but rather a right, and be able to demand it. And duty bearers, on the other hand, must be ready to respond to the need of the people. And in our current crisis, build better safety nets. Thank you.
Thank you. Aisha?
Yes, thank you so much. So undoubtedly, I think local governance is of great importance, and there is no question that we need to invest more there. But if we truly want to achieve zero hunger for all, things need to change at the global level as well in terms of governance of our food systems. Debates around decolonization of aid also touch important discussions of global structural inequalities on global trade regimes, for instance, which are main hindrances to which national systems are unable to prosper. So that would, for me, be the main takeaway.
Fantastic. Thank you very much to the panelists. And I again want to take a moment and thank you to the audience for your questions that really went on to make our conversation and our discussion more meaningful. We will find a way to somehow follow up on this. I think behind the scenes, we're all noting as organizers of this event that we need to create more time. There were many more questions coming in. I just want to thank you so much for that. And of course, to my panelists, to Danielle Resnick, thank you for your contribution. Tendai Saidi giving us that view in Malawi, Aisha Jamshed in Pakistan, and to Rauda Seman in Ethiopia. Thank you for the work that you're doing, ladies, and for so eloquently bringing us this message today, the message of the importance of the local governance as we try to strengthen the resilience of our food systems in the context of the crisis that we are in. Please, ladies and gentlemen, acquaint yourself with this year's report. It is now available and online. Let's share it. Let's get the message out there. That hashtag still applies. It is GHI 2022. Let's continue the conversation. And I think that's the beauty about the various social media platforms and the virtual platform, is that we can really take the debate and the discussion further. I'm pretty sure many of you ladies are available on these social media platforms, so you can actually contact them directly and hopefully continue the conversation in that regard. So again, thank you to the organizers of this event. Thank you to the team at Welthungerhilfe. Thank you to the team at Concern Worldwide, to the team at KFW, to those who are behind this wonderful production, making sure that we're able to get this message to as many of you across the world. I would have been interested to know, we're still about 400 people on the platform, where you are all joining us from. It's incredible that we've come together to have this global conversation, as of course we throw forward to the events that are coming up and the conversations upcoming, as we seek to get the power to the people. As we heard it, the most vulnerable people are those that are most affected, and those are the ones we need to empower in this conversation as we seek to strengthen our food systems around the world. Thank you very much for this, and thank you for your time. And in fact, it is one of those rare occasions where we can dismiss a little bit earlier, but it's better to do that than to run the clock over. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. It's been good having your company, and we will see you next year, hopefully with a more encouraging and better report and more improvement in the efforts that we're undertaking. Thank you very much. Goodbye, and see you next time.